Okay, great. Let's get started. Expect there'll be additional people piling in, but welcome to Marin Conservation League's Fire and Environment Working Group. This is a monthly meeting, the second Monday of the month. My name is Mike Swezy, and with me is Larry Minikes, who's co-chair of the committee and working as moderator. MCL is dedicated to preserving and protecting a marine's environment through careful study and advocacy. And action happens through MCL's 5 issue committees: Parks and Open Space, Land Use and Transportation, Agricultural Lands Use Committee, Climate Action Working Group, and Fire and Environment Working Group. The monthly meetings feature guest speakers, updates, and discussions, often leading to policy development and advocacy. MCL is a volunteer organization, so those of you who are not members, we urge you to please join us. We need your support and interest to continue our work. The Fire and Environment Working Group started in 2019, focused on promoting ecologically sound vegetation management policies and practices that support increased wildfire resilience in the built environment and in wildlands. Today we have a special guest, Allison Forrestel, who's going to give us a recount of the Woodward Fire. I don't know why the name always escapes me. This is a redo of a presentation she did for the OneTAM summit in last month. So thank you for Allison for volunteering to do it again. Allison is the Chief of Natural Resource Management and Science at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. She's previously worked for Point Reyes National Seashore as a fire ecologist. Allison holds a Master of Forestry from Yale and did her PhD in fire and forest ecology at UC Berkeley. And her research took place in Point Reyes National Seashore, so she's eminently qualified and connected to that place. So we're going to get some really quality information. So Allison will give her presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. What's worked best for us is if you write your question in the chat box, Larry will read it. We don't get too many people, we can have a more informal conversation, but let's just go with that for now. And then later in the program, we're going to get an update from Christie Neill with Marin County Fire and Tami Lavezzo, who's doing the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So we'll get an update on their progress. But now it's floors to Allison. So take it away, Allison.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks for the introduction, Mike. I'm going to make an attempt here to share my screen. Let's see. Will you all just let me know if you can see that?
That's great.
Okay. Let's see, and I got to do a little moving stuff around on my end so I can also see it. So just give me one more second. Okay, perfect. I am now good to go. Yeah, so as Mike said, I'm going to be talking about the Woodward Fire that happened this summer at Point Reyes. This is going to be really similar to the presentation I gave for the OneTAM symposium about a month ago. So apologies to anyone who was present for that. The one thing I'll say before I jump in is just I'm going to be talking about fire ecology and, the actual sort of progression of events on the ground at Point Reyes this summer. And I want to acknowledge that this fire and the overall 2020 fire season has been very traumatic for a lot of people, with, pretty much everyone with significant smoke impacts, people having to evacuate their homes, homes lost, lives lost. So I'm not going to be talking about the human impact, but I wanted to acknowledge it before I start out. So I wanted to just start with laying some groundwork of a little bit of basics of fire ecology. And I wanted to introduce this idea of a fire regime. It's maybe the most important concept in fire ecology. And it's really just this simple idea that fires burn differently in different ecosystems. And so the fire regime is a pattern of how frequently fires burn, how hot they burn, what time of year they tend to burn in a given ecosystem. And so just to walk you through some examples of some different fire regimes here in Marin County, we have a number of ecosystems that are evolved for a high severity, low frequency fire regime. So that means these places, when they burn hot, but they're really not evolved to burn very often. And there's actually can be negative ecological impacts if they burn too often. So Bishop Pine is sort of a classic example of that, as is our maritime chaparral. Sort of the opposite end of the spectrum is some of the forests you see in the lower mid elevations of the Sierra Nevada mixed conifer forest. Those forests are evolved to burn with low severity, but high frequency. So they need to burn often. And when they burn, they really, low intensity burns. And the risk is kind of the opposite in these forests, that if they don't burn often enough, you get fires that are too hot and really ecologically damaging. And then I also just wanted to throw in redwood forests here, since we have them here in Marin and they just don't fit neatly into any of these categories. Redwood forests can tolerate sort of a range of different fire severities and frequencies. You can't talk about fire in California without talking about Native American management. The Coast Miwok people were long the managers of Point Reyes and the rest of Marin, and fire was a really important land management tool used by the Native Americans. It was used for food production, to manage food pests, for basketry materials. And I have a couple of quotes of like firsthand accounts of Native American management in Marin. Well, the Pomo is from Sonoma County, but from the region anyway. So the first is a quote from a Pomo Indian oral history. The grass was burned every year. The fires were started and allowed to burn in every place. Burning was to make the weeds grow better and to keep down the brush. And then the second quote is from Archibald Menzies. He was a botanical explorer in the late 1700s. And this quote was from when he actually was at Tamales Point at Point Reyes. So it's a very local description of what was happening at that time. The grass and brushwood on this headland had been lately burned down, so that I had little opportunity here to augment my botanical collection. And the images in the sort of background of these quotes are from a prescribed fire that was done at Point Reyes, actually right along Limmentor Road, maybe about 10 years ago in Deschampsia Coastal Prairie. And you can see the tussocks of the Deschampsia grasses, right after they were burned, immediately after the fire. And that's what they looked like a year later, just vigorously resprouting there on the right. Okay, so moving on to the Woodward Fire, having set a little bit of context of, the way fire acts in our coastal marine ecosystems. So I'm sure everybody knows in the middle of August, California had a very unusual lightning event. It was a storm that took place over 2 nights, the night of August 15th and the night of August 16th. This image on the left is the lightning strikes just on the first night of the storm. And, over the course of that storm, there were 7,000 strikes that started 350 fires. It's just an exceedingly rare event, it's particularly, in the coast during the summer for something like this to happen. And one of the fires that started was the Woodward Fire. It was discovered that Monday. So, the storm it was a Saturday night and a Sunday night, and Monday afternoon, the Woodward Fire was discovered. At the time it was discovered, it was just about 5 acres. I have a map on the next page of kind of the location in the park of where the fire burned, but it was really right in the heart of the park in the Philip Burton Wilderness. At the same time this fire started, there were a number of other fires in Marin County. There was one near Throckmorton on Mount Tam. There was a fire on Mount Barnaby that grew to be 17 acres. There were a couple of other fires in Point Reyes, and I'm sure others around the county that I'm not even aware of. And so I bring that up just to say that had more firefighting resources been directed to this Woodward Fire, no doubt some of these other fires burning in Marin would have grown bigger. So there's a lot of spread in this fire on the first day. By that, afternoon of the 18th, it had spread to 700 acres. By the following afternoon, it had tripled in size again to 2,000 acres. And really for those first few days, there were not a lot of firefighting resources available. There were no aircraft available for the fire because, in addition to what was happening in Marin, there were fires burning all over the state. The first aircraft were brought in on the 20th, so that Thursday. And then on Saturday, the 22nd, a type 1 incident management team arrived at the park. And by that point in time, the fire had grown to 2,500 acres. For folks who aren't familiar with federal emergency management, so there are different levels of incident management teams of folks who have expertise in coming and addressing emergency situations. And type 1 is the highest level of an incident management team that has the experience with the largest and most complex emergency incidents, fires, and other types of emergencies. And while the Woodward Fire wasn't and did not become that large, it was just the proximity in Marin County to so many communities that really warranted the type 1 team. The other thing I wanted to say on this slide is that most of the rest of the fire growth after that point was from burnout operations. And burnout operations are when firefighters use fire to fight fire. So they basically start a prescribed fire at a place that's more easy to control, a road or a dozer line, and then let it grow back to the uncontrolled fire edge. And so about 3,000 acres of the Woodward Fire were sort of the quote unquote natural spread, and the remaining, 40%, the remaining 2,000 acres was from these burnout operations. And I can show that a little bit more on this next slide. Okay, so this is a progression map. Here in the center. First, this is just an overview map on the left side. So the red perimeter is where the fire is on the west side of Highway 1, right in the heart of the seashore. And then this center image is a fire progression. So the green and yellow colors are the areas that burned kind of earlier on in the course of the fire. And then the orange, pink, and red are the areas that burned later on in the course of the fire. And you can see the corresponding dates over here on the right. So you can see this red star here is the fire origin, where it started approximately on the 17th. Let me see here what I want to say. And so the first couple of days, the fire really was growing toward the southeast, toward the town of Bolinas. And you can see this quite a lot of growth in the first couple of days. After about 5 days, the growth shifted more towards the northeast. So there was this leg that spread up towards Mount Wittenberg and Sky Camp. And then there's this other kind of dog leg of the fire that was burning actually pretty close to the Bear Valley Visitor Center and the Morgan Horse Ranch. And then basically starting with these orange colors, everything else is burnout operations. So starting on the 29th, pretty much the rest of the spread is from these burnouts. So you can see these strips of orange here are the firefighters igniting basically this big prescribed fire. They burn from this north flank along Limentour Road and then all along the Bear Valley Trail on the east flank of the fire. I want to show this picture of the drone that was used for the burnout operations. This is a relatively new tool. These are ping pong balls. They're filled with potassium permanganate and then injected with ethylene glycol when they exit the drone, which basically creates a small chemical reaction that when the ping pong ball hits the ground, it creates a small fire. This is a much safer way for a fighter to be, doing these burnout operations than walking through this, really difficult terrain close to an uncontrolled fire edge. So it's really an incredible safety innovation. Okay, so shifting gears, I wanted to talk a little bit, or just share some pictures of what the different fire intensity looked like that was burning in this fire. This picture on the left is an area with low intensity fire along the Bear Valley Trail. And then the picture on the right is from up on the Sky Trail. The red arrow is pointing to a little tongue of flame. The fire front's fairly close to us there, but it's just burning with pretty low intensity. This is the burnout operation from Limentour Road. And you can see here it's more of a moderate intensity burn. There's a little more flame. It's going up a couple of the tree trunks, but nothing too crazy. And then of course, there are some places that burned with really high intensity fire. This is a shot of some Douglas fir trees torching in their crowns and one of the early nights of the fire progression. Okay, so this is, I wanted to share the burn severity from the fire. So this image is this is a map of burn severity. It's taken from satellite imagery. And just to walk you through the legend of this, the red colors are the areas that burned with high severity. The yellow colors are areas that burned with moderate severity. Seafoam green is the low severity. And then these darker green colors are areas that didn't burn at all. This was captured from a satellite image on September 14th. And this fire has been burning on the interior since that time. So I'm sure some of these unburned areas now, would map probably as low severity. But the takeaway from this image really is that this was a good fire. It did good ecological work on the ground. A majority of the fire burned with low severity or, was even unburned, although many of these areas, as I said, probably are low severity now. Only 8% of the fire area burned with high severity. And then just to show you what some of these areas look like out in the fire, on the left here, this is a stand of ceanothus that burned quite hot. Ceanothus is evolved for high severity fire. It regenerates from a buried soil seed bank. So my hope and expectation is that come March, if we were to go out there, we would see a carpet of ceanothus seedlings in the understory of this now pretty stark landscape. And then the image on the right is, a place that has much more patchy burn severity. You can see bay trees where the entire canopy is still totally green and intact, and some Doug fir, hillsides with healthy green Doug fir too. Some patches that burned hotter, but they're relatively small, so hopefully we'll pretty easily seed in with natives. Another shot of just some mixed severity across the landscape. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about the different vegetation communities that burned in this fire and kind of what we might expect looking forward. Oops, sorry about that. So just to walk you through again, this image, this red line is the Woodward Fire perimeter. This dashed pink line is the Vision Fire perimeter. So everything to the west over here burned in the 1995 Vision Fire. And then, so this area then has now burned twice, once in 1995 and then again this past year. The different colors on this map indicate different veg communities. So Douglas fir is this dark green color, orange is coastal scrub, and then purple is ceanothus scrub. And so you can see most of the burn area was Douglas fir, about a quarter coastal scrub, and then 8% ceanothus, and then about 40% of the fire had previously burned in the 1995 Vision Fire. Then just what some of these veg communities look like. This is a picture of Douglas fir forest that burned in 1995, and then this is what a place that burned again as Douglas fir forest in the Woodward Fire would have looked like, with standing snags of Doug fir, some mature trees with intact canopies, and Douglas fir regenerating as well. And then, a big portion of this fire was Douglas fir that had never burned in known history. And so that this picture on the bottom left is more what that would look like up by the top of Mount Wittenberg. Coastal scrub, this picture is actually taken from the Woodward Trail some years ago. So this is, the actual landscape that burned, a lot of coastal scrub. And then you can see the sort of flattish shrubs here. That's a stand of ceanothus. There's some pretty extensive stands of ceanothus that regenerated post-Vision Fire that then burned again in this Woodward Fire. And I think this is a really good picture to hold in mind when thinking forward to what this landscape that burned might look like 10 years from now. This picture was taken probably 10 or 15 years after the Vision Fire. And so, Douglas fir is pretty sensitive to the impacts of wildfire. So I would expect the landscape that burned will have, a lot of standing snags. I think we're to see ceanothus regenerating maybe in places that we haven't seen it before, and also, places that were ceanothus pre-fire. I expect to see Douglas fir regenerating into the fire perimeter, and then of course a mix of scrub and grassland. So I spent about a week up at the Woodward Fire, maybe the second week it was burning, so mid to late August, and I was working as a resource advisor. And so my role as a resource advisor was to work with the folks managing the fire to make recommendations about how the suppression operations might be adjusted so that, you know, they're less damaging to the resources. So of course, life, health, safety always comes first, but sometimes a small tweak can make a big difference to avoid a patch of rare plants or something like that. So some of the biggest suppression impacts came from retardant drops. 50,000 gallons of retardant were dropped on this fire. You can see the orangish pinkish color in this image. This is one of those places. Fire retardant can act as a fertilizer. So, you know, it can cause weed flushes on upland landscapes, and then it can be very toxic if it's dropped in aquatic or riparian systems. And so the park and the resource advisors worked closely with the fire management organization to make sure that didn't happen. Another potential impact from fire suppression is water drops. So this is a super scooper tanker that was pulling water out of Tamales Bay and dropping it on the fire. There are also a lot of helicopters working the fire, and those air equipment were taking, you know, water and moving it out onto the fire. So there's a potential to move invasive aquatic organisms. And again, the resource advisors in the park worked closely with the aviation team to make sure that any places with known aquatic invasive organisms weren't used for these water dips. And then probably the biggest impact from the suppression operation is the dozer lines. Are just shy of about 8 miles of dozer lines put in as part of this fire and as part of putting this fire out. And then, you know, since the fire was burning in the Philip Burton wilderness, that's an even bigger deal to use bulldozers in wilderness. The Park Service in particular takes the use of bulldozers very seriously. At any time a dozer blade goes down in a national park, the superintendent has to give permission. And, you know, I think it was very justified in this fire, the threat to the neighboring communities. It really made a lot of sense to use the dozer lines, but they are impactful. Let's see. And to that end, I wanted to talk a little bit about this pair of images. The photo on the left is a dozer line that was put in up near the Sky Camp, Sky Trail area near Mount Wittenberg. And the photo on the right is a dozer line that was put in on the Vedanta property, which is a private property right adjacent to the Bear Valley Trail. As I said, the Park Service takes the use of dozer lines really seriously. And one of the constraints the Park Service put on the folks putting out the fire is no more than 2 blades wide. That was the maximum width. The Vedanta property, since it's private property, that is actually a state responsibility area. So the park, the federal government was no longer in charge for those decisions on that piece of property. And so the decision was made to put a dozer line in 4 blades wide. So just much more impactful. And I wanted to bring it up because I think it illustrates that it makes a really big difference what the land manager is telling the fire suppression organization, that, you know, you can really have a difference in the outcome just by communication. Okay, so now the fire, you know, is controlled. It's not out, it's still burning in the interior, and it will be until we have a significant rain event. But really the park has moved on to the post-fire response phase of this fire. And the first step in that is doing suppression repair. In a normal year, suppression repair happens before the firefighters leave the fire. 2020, as everyone knows, was not a normal fire season. And so there was actually a hold put on all suppression repair operations for much of the summer. But at this point, just last week, the park wrapped up repairing all of the dozer lines and, you know, the other sort of direct impacts from putting the fire out. And I'll have some pictures to share of the dozer line repair in the next couple of slides. So more on that in just a second. And then after sort of that immediate suppression repair, the next phases of, you know, restoring the landscape are the bear and bar phase. So bear is burned area emergency response, and that's really emergency stabilization in the immediate year after the fire. And then over the course of those first 3 years, you get into burned area rehabilitation. And some of the actions those 2 programs take on are stabilizing cultural sites, surveilling hazard trees and mitigating for them, repairing fences and trails and things like that. And of course, invasive plant management. I am sure on this fire, there's going to be a huge challenge with invasive plants just because of the ecosystem that we're working on in here at the coast. Okay, so the dozer line repair is mostly done with excavators. There were a couple of fire crews out doing this in conjunction with the park staff. This is work in action, repairing one of the dozer lines up near Mount Wittenberg. And you can see this is not a perfectly paired image, but you can get a sense of what it looked like before and after. Like really, they did a fantastic job with the dozer line repair. Talking to my natural resource colleagues at Point Reyes, they're really happy with how this looks. This pair of images is maybe a little bit better paired. You can see these two trees are the same as these two trees and really looks a lot better. Okay, so another part of the suppression repair that's taken place is places where there were bigger gaps, just than the typical two-blade dozer line. The park put together a plan to spread straw and then put out some seed of native grass species and other native species to just speed along the recovery. And so let's see, hopefully I can get this video to play. We'll see how this goes. This is a time-lapse photo of straw being applied out at the bottom of that Vedanta dozer line. So kind of cool, you can just get a sense of how much work that is. A lot of people doing a lot of work out there. So this is a picture just of the seeding process. The park really kind of lucked out. Normally, seeding with native seed would never even be an option because there wouldn't be, locally appropriate native seed available. That's obviously not something that you can buy on the commercial market. But it just so happened that Caltrans has been in a collaboration with the Park Service to do basically farming of native seeds for some repairs that they've been doing along Highway 1 between Muir Beach and all the way up to Point Reyes. And so there's a bunch of native seed that was, appropriate for this location that had already been grown and harvested and was in storage. And Caltrans was able to enter an agreement with the park to purchase some of that seed. The photo on the left is Hedgerow is the company that did this amplification work. This photo on the left is their seed storage facility, and the photo on the right is one of the Point Reyes staff measuring out seed to go out on site. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'll just show a few photos to end of just to say that this landscape is already recovering. There's coyote brush resprouting, ferns resprouting. This is a cow parsnip that, was resprouting in September while the fire was still burning. So it's a very resilient landscape, and I have every reason to hope that there'll be some really interesting botanical finds out there in the spring, and that that this really was a good fire and the landscape is going to recover. And that is it. I'm happy to shift over into question mode.
Great, Allison, thank you so much. That is so informative. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it, so I'm speaking for everyone here. So let me go to, there's really right now 3 questions, and folks feel free if you want to ask more. Jim Casper is asking if is there still fire, and if so, where is it? And then for controlled burn actions, is there any trimming ever done beforehand to minimize ladder fuel conditions and fire into the tree crown?
I think there's just a tiny bit of fire still burning, nothing like crazy. There haven't been any, big columns coming out of the fire in quite a few weeks. So it's, just a smoldering here or there, I would say. As to the second question about fuels treatments, the fire management program has done, a variety of treatments at Point Reyes over the years. There's been a fuel break in progress along Limantour Road that I'm sure you've seen if you've driven out there, you know, with Bishop Pine cutting along the road. And that prescribed burn that I had some pictures of early on in the presentation was part of this same sort of fuel break along Limantour Road. So certainly there's been a lot of work, and, you know, of course, it's never possible to do treatments across the whole park. It's a big park.
Okay, thank you, Allison. And Richard Boyden has a couple of questions. I'll ask them one at a time, or I'll repeat them one at a time, excuse me. He's asking about the impact of salt water from Tamales Bay.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that, you know, before this fire, the park resource staff at Point Reyes and myself for Golden Gate and our fire management team were kind of going back and forth on, like, what's the best source of water? Is it better to take water from a pond that might have red-legged Tamales Bay? I don't know that there's like scientific evidence available to answer this question, but just speaking anecdotally from the Vision Fire, there were a lot of saltwater drops during the Vision Fire that, as far as anyone's ever seen, haven't really had any impact. So I think it's going to be fine.
Great, thank you. And are you able to estimate when the Bayer report is going to be made available to the public?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that it's done, but I don't know. And I do know there's some sensitive cultural resource information in there because there are some archaeological sites that burned. So I know that has to be redacted before it can be released. I can certainly put that question to my counterpart at Point Reyes and circle back as far as public release of that document. I don't know.
Okay, great. You could get back to Mike on that. And Dave Long from California Native Plant Society is surprisingly asking what species are being reseeded.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can answer them all off the top of my head, and I don't even know if I know what the final seed mix was. It's like, you know, Elamis glaucus. There's probably some Scrophularia californica in there, kind of like maybe some Madia, like the weedy species that would do well in an opening where there's a big gap where, you know, if we didn't seed anything, we know we would see Avena or worse. So again, you know, if you want to connect offline, I'm happy to track down the actual list and send it your way, but that hopefully at least gives a sense.
Great. Thanks, Allison. And then Terry Thomas, Richard Boyden has another question here. And what can you tell us about the old growth Douglas fir forest in the fire footprint? How much old growth was destroyed?
I think that my internet might have been cutting out. I didn't fully hear that question.
Okay, and you can also pull up the questions in your chat, but again, I'll read it to you. What can you tell us about the old growth Douglas fir forest in the fire footprint? And do you know how much old growth was destroyed or burned?
So I don't think most of that part of the park was old growth. I believe most of that part of the park had been, you know, cut for timber at some point in the not particularly recent past. There were definitely some big Douglas fir trees in there. So, you know, although not old growth, approximating old growth conditions. And that portion of the fire that didn't burn in 1995, but that was Douglas fir forest, did kind of have that old growthy feel. And that was probably maybe 20 or 30% of the overall fire area.
Great, thank you for that, Allison. And Terry Thomas is asking, can you address why fire lines of 2 dozer widths seem narrower than the need of fuel breaks pre-fire?
Say that question again.
Can you address why fire lines of 2 dozer width fire lines seem narrower than the need of fuel breaks pre-fire? That pre-fire fuel breaks are wider. Is that, I believe, what Terry's
You're saying, Terry, that like the fuel breaks you've seen proposed are, you know, wider than,
or the ones that I've seen around Marin County that are, you know, are the fuel breaks that are being used seem wider than 2 dozer widths. Somebody might correct me there, but most of the ones that I've seen are wider. And I'm just wondering if there is particular reason that you would know of. But you guys don't really put in fuel breaks, do you?
Not as much, I think, as maybe on the county lands, and maybe Christie has a good answer to this question. I mean, just thinking about a 2 dozer width break, you know, in the Douglas fir understory in this area that burned in this fire, like obviously that's not going to stop fire spreading from, you know, embers being or anything happening in the canopy. What that would stop is fire moving along the through the understory, through the forest floor. So if you're having like torching and a lot of wind, you know, there's really no width of fuel break that's going to make a difference. I'm not sure what the perspective is on the county fuel break, so I'm not sure I can answer that part of the question. And in a lot of cases, I think these fuel breaks are to, you know, really give the folks putting the fires out a place to work from. I think the park was really glad to have done that work along Lemon Tour Road that had previously been done, because then that became a place that they could think about, like, let's do a burnout operation from, or like, we know we can hold the fire if it gets to Lemon Tour Road, it's in really good shape. So I think that's the perspective in thinking about these two, is just what could a firefighter do from that place in the event of a fire? Does it make it safer to fight fires in there?
Great, thank you. And a question again from Richard Boyden. Is the park is Point Reyes considering introducing more prescribed fire to any part of the landscape there?
I think that the park is still like in up to their nose responding to this event. And I think that the park staff has not gotten to the point of being able to look forward and, you know, think about how we might change or do things differently in the future. I just don't think that they're there yet.
Great. And Jim Casper is asking really a follow-up to Terry's question, which is, does the fuel break width differ based on proximity to developed properties, to the WUI, for example?
I mean, certainly, you know, the 100 feet piece, like protecting the property and doing that fuels reduction immediately adjacent to the property is the most important thing, and the most, you know, bang for the buck and valuable intervention that can be made, for sure. Absolutely right adjacent.
Great. And that really takes care of the questions. And Allison, again, really wonderful. And I'll turn it back over to Mike. Mike, are you on? I'll let you, there you go.
Thanks, Allison. Really appreciate it. Thanks for giving so much of your time, and hopefully we can get you back next year with a report on how things are recovering.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'm going to stay on and listen to the rest of the meeting, if that's all right.
Great. Welcome. All of our meetings are open to any interested party, so you're entirely welcome. So next up, Tami and Christie were going to give us an update. They presented last month on the, gave us a great bit of detail on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan for Marin. And I asked them to come back and kind of give us an update as best they could. So I don't know who's up. Tami, there you are. Hi.
Yeah, hi. I actually have just a few slides to show, so I'm going to pull those up right now. And I think Christie's going to kick us off.
Yeah, just real quick, like Mike said, we presented the refreshing of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan last month, and I'll just reiterate why we decided the last CWPP was completed in 2015. Certainly, the approach that we took, utilizing a contractor with Sonoma technology, is what we used back in 2015. And basically, since that time, we've gotten access to new data. There's certainly more information and technology today. There's been a lot of good work completed. We've had 5 years of lessons learned, I guess I would say, from certainly the North Bay fires to the last couple extraordinary fire seasons where we've learned a lot. We've had the lessons learned report from the Board of Supervisors completed, the grand jury report, the development of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. So a lot of stuff has changed since the previous CWPP. So we felt that refreshing it was a good idea. In addition to that, basically the biggest catalyst was that the County of Marin obtained a FEMA grant to update the county hazard mitigation plan. And the CWPP feeds the fire input to that county hazard mitigation plan. And so some of that grant will be utilized to help us refresh the CWPP. So we had the time and the money. And just again, backtracking a little bit, the requirements for a community wildfire protection plan are outlined in the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And they're really surround 3 goals and objectives of collaboration, prioritizing fuel reduction, and then treatment of structure ignitability. And so Tami will just run through some quick updates from just a month ago. Certainly, we're on a compressed timeline, I guess. We've had a long summer, obviously. I know I haven't been able to give 100% of my attention to this in the last couple months, but certainly the next 2 months I am. And so I'll turn it over to Tami.
Sure. Can everyone see my screen okay? I'm assuming so. So, you know, last month when we talked about the CWPP, we highlighted some of the key elements of the plan that we were going to be updating. I'll just quickly sort of go through those here and give a quick update on where we're at with progress. We're probably 2 weeks behind the schedule that I had showed at the last meeting, but I think that's okay. One of the reasons for that delay actually ended up being that we decided, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, but we decided to correct the fuel model fire behavior input to account for what happened on the Woodward fire. So that was kind of a last minute correction to the fuels mapping that we wanted to make sure that we got in there, but talk about that in a second. So as I mentioned, during our last presentation, we've updated sections and some of the elements of the plan based on comments and feedback that we've gotten from stakeholders. And Christie has solicited a number of stakeholders, land management agencies, Fire Safe Marin folks, the MWPA, there's a list of those, which I'll show in a moment. And so as we've been receiving input, we've been incorporating that into the plan. As I just mentioned, one of the big things that we did in terms of the amount of work that has gone into the refresh is updating the countywide fuels map. Talk about that in a second. And we've actually completed that, and that's ready to go to be used for the fire behavior and fire hazard assessment task. We are updating the county level fire hazard assessment, as I talked about at the last meeting. And we are also adding a new element to the plan, which is to develop parcel level fire threat maps that can be used to better address structure ignitability, which is a key component to CWPPs. We are in the process as we go through and run the fire behavior models and develop the fire hazard assessment maps. We are concurrently updating the recommendations and action plan in the plan. So we've got a lot of work that's happening sort of all concurrently right now. And one thing that Christie will talk about in a couple slides is we're including an updated list of priority projects. So we've been soliciting input from fire agencies and organizations to develop this sort of new kind of master wish list of projects. As I mentioned, Christie has been soliciting input from land management agencies, the Fire Chiefs Association, MWPA, Fire Safe Marin, Marin Conservation League, this organization. So all of that feedback that we're receiving has been great, and I think we'll result in a better plan. Some of the key sections that we've, based on the feedback that we've received, some of the key sections that we're focusing on that are a little bit different than the 2016 CWPP. You'll see when the document comes out is we're really revamping the executive summary so that it's kind of almost a standalone summary document. And we're going to be developing an online story map from that executive summary that will have, it'll be a website where you can actually go in and navigate around on some of the fire hazard mapping work and maps that will be completing as part of the effort. We're really taking a look at the discussion around the wildland-urban interface and sort of what does that mean? If you don't live in the wildland-urban interface, it doesn't mean that your house will not burn. So we're trying to, really kind of reframe how we talk about the wildland-urban interface. Some of the other updates throughout the document, we're obviously updating all of the socioeconomic and financial data, economic data that was in the document from 5 years ago. We've added a new section that talks about climate variability and the impacts of, the changing climate on fire and what we might expect in the future. And a lot of that discussion is based on some recent work that's being done out of UC Merced by a professor there named Leroy Westerling. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're focusing a little more emphasis on structural ignitability. That was one of the areas that we felt was not as strong as it could have been in the 2016 CWPP. And so, having more discussion around home hardening, how can you make your home and property, more fire resilient. We're also looking at making sure that the mitigation strategy section and tactical strategies are consistent with what's being presented at the county level. Fire Safe Marin has done a lot of work over the last couple of years to really put together some good materials and information for the public that we just want to make sure that everything that we're saying in the CWP is consistent with what's also being presented and discussed outside of the CWPP. We've added a new section to address environmental considerations. And that came out of a recommendation from this group. And it was needed. We didn't have that section in the last round. And as I mentioned, we are updating the recommendations and the list of priority projects. And so just a quick sneak peek. I mentioned that one of the big efforts as part of this work was to update a fuels map for Marin County. So this is really looking at a newly collected vegetation data set and integrating that with some recent LIDAR data that has been developed and developing what's called a fuel model map, which is what is required as input to do fire behavior modeling. And so all of that new vegetation information has been used. And that was work that came out of a project by the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. And we're really trying to utilize that new data set as best we can to develop, sort of a state-of-the-art field model representation for Marin. And that data will be at 5 meters, which allows enough spatial resolution to look at on a finer scale down to the community level, what does the fire hazard look like there? And there's a lot of other purposes for that data. It's not part of this CWPP effort, but other agencies, county agencies can use that data to do fuels treatment modeling scenarios and can be used for a lot of other purposes. So with that, I will turn it over to Christie. She's going to talk about the updated list of priority projects that we're pulling together. So Christie.
Yeah, so in the previous CWPP,
Oh, Christie, you're muted.
thanks. So back in 2015, Appendix B has a very large project list pulled together to identify areas where people thought there should be some priority work. And so this list is a similar list. It's kind of a large wish list in a way. There's not necessarily any funding designated nor any environmental compliance done yet. I mean, there could be, but these are just examples of projects that the stakeholders have inputted that they think are kind of high priority projects. So again, the projects are generalized to some extent. Again, they have not necessarily been vetted out. Some of them may have been, but not all of them. Some of them are recognizable because they're projects that might be currently occurring right now under whatever funding source people have to complete them. So it's not all inclusive, but we're just trying to get a better updated list for the CWPP. So a number of agencies have entered their projects. We did an online Google sheet, and here in a day or so, we're gonna take a snapshot of that, and that would go into the document. So there's no commitments there with those projects. They're just identified areas where the stakeholders feel like priority work needs to get done.
Yep. So those are all the slides that we have. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Bruce didn't have a question, but you did appear to answer it. From Allison. Okay. From Allison Forrestel. Tami, you said the fuel models were updated based in part on what was seen on the Woodward Fire this summer. Could you talk more about that, please?
Sure. So when we developed the fuel model map, we actually had an initial draft of it being developed while the fire was burning. And after the fire, Christie put us in touch with the folks at WFDIS, the Wildland Fire Decision Support System Modeling Group. And they were able to provide us with fire progression maps and updated fuel models in the area of the fire.
Basically, Amy Ziegler, Allison helped us calibrate.
Thank you. And I think that does it for questions. Oh, wait, Mike, will there be? Hold on, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Will there be, from Mike Swezy, will there be an opportunity to review a draft plan?
Yes, once we have one to review, but we're a little bit behind, but we're getting on track. But yes, we will have a plan. Might be a short review, but yes.
Okay, thank you, Christie. And from Bruce Goins, how much detail might we expect in projects identified in the CWPP?
What do you mean in terms of detail? Basically, what we asked them to identify was the name of the project, the land ownership, what kind of work it would be, you know, vegetation removal along a evac route, defensible space, could be it could be a planning documents, it could be county or specific fire preparedness. It could be basically anything that people want to enter. We tried to get as much detail as possible, but not all the columns will be all filled in. We didn't, you know, an estimate of maybe miles, acres. If an agency had those details, I think we allowed for the opportunity to put that in the document. So.
Okay, great. Bruce, it seems that answered your question, or do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, just that, you know, these projects, you're setting the foundation for a lot of future work here within the community. And of course, eventually we're going to have to we're going to see some detailed environmental analysis associated with this, whether first starting with project specific and whether we do something broader, we don't know. But, the more details, of course, the better, so we get an idea. I'm particularly interested in widths, distances, 50 feet, 100 feet, or beyond 100 feet. All of these things have ramifications for environmental analysis. And so I just, we could flag items that were going to require, a fairly much more detailed environmental analysis. It'd be good to know that sooner rather than later. So, but no, Christie, that was a great answer. More details, more information is better. That's, I guess, the bottom line. I know you get all you can, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And then from Richard Boyden, are you able to give us a little background on the WFDSS?
Wildland Fire Decision Support System. It's a decision-making suite of tools that federal land management agencies utilize. So you Google it and it will give you an overview.
Great. Thank you, Christie. And then Dave Long has a question here. Are you just compiling a list of projects from various stakeholders, or is there any analysis of relative importance and merits and interrelationships going to be overlaid on these projects? Did you follow that question? I can read it again if you like.
So basically it's those who would have funding and or be a lead type agency that would implement a project, or in cooperation with a state, federal, or private landowner. Many of the projects have been identified from fire departments, specifically a lot of roadside evacuation route clearing, defensible space, those kinds of things. There won't be any overlaying. Basically, it's just a way to help them start to identify projects to address structural ignitability, protection of communities, and prioritizing fuel reduction, fire hazard reduction work.
Great. Thank you, Christie. Thank you, Tami. Again, another very informative presentation. And Mike, go back to you.
Okay. Tami, there you go. Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank Tami and Christie for giving us the update. I realize you guys are on a tight timeline due to funding issues. And also, I think there's a retirement looming very soon. So congratulations. I have a couple announcements, and if others have some, they can chime in after. The Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority is supported by the Ecologically Sound Practices partnership. That's really, many of you are participating in that. I just want to let you know that those meetings continue on a monthly basis. There's a carbon resource management group that is focused on issues related to carbon, our carbon footprint relative to fire prevention. So there's some really good projects going on there. Their next meeting is November 12th, Thursday, this week, 1 to 3. And if you're not on that list and you're interested in participating, let me know and we'll make sure you get in that. There's another group called the Vegetation Management and Habitat Protection Group that many of you on this call have been participating on, and that group focuses on fuel reduction projects and what are best management practices for that. And there's been a lot of discussion about compliance. So that's kind of at the heart of some of the questions we're hearing today. That next meeting is Friday, November 20th. That meeting goes from 1 to 3. And then finally, there's another interesting group that's called the Defensible Space for Ecological Benefit. They're really looking at the messages and the outreach that's going to homeowners, residents, to make their properties less ignitable and have adequate defensible space, but do that in a way that enhances ecological benefit. So that they're meeting on Tuesday, November 24th. 1 to 3. That group is pretty far along into action planning, and so they may be first to the finish line with some good recommendations. But we're really working closely with Fire Safe Marin and Master Gardeners, UC Extension, to kind of add value and fill in gaps for those groups. So that work continues. Again, if you're interested in participating in any of those, check with us and we'll make sure you're on, if you're not on the list, that you can get there. If you go to the MWPA website, there is a button at the top on the button bar that says ESP partnership, and there's some information there about past meetings, and there's a list of the upcoming meeting dates, and we hope to have other products there soon, including best management practices for all of those kinds of things. Okay, does anyone else have an announcement?
Hi, Mike, Bruce Goins here. Just a reminder that the next MWPA meeting is on November 19th at 3 o'clock. Hope you all interested can join. We have a very interesting agenda coming up. We will be talking in pretty great detail regarding investigations we've made into CEQA compliance and approaches that the authority might take. So I think folks will find that very interesting, along with a couple of other topics. So please join if you like, and check for the packet in advance and get through it in advance. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Bruce. Again, MWPA website has the list of the governing board's meeting schedule, and in advance they post the board packet with all of the information that the committee receives, and they also have the recording of past meetings posted. So if you've missed all the action before, you get a chance to review it. Okay, well, Bruce he's not going to relive those moments. Okay, anybody else have any comments or any announcements? Seeing none, I move that we adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for showing up, and I hope you found it valuable. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Mike, I have a question in there for you.
Oh,
Thank you, Tami.
Christie.
Oh, really? Ah. Oh, no. Well deserved.
Hey, we're going to keep that in the recording. That's a good reaction. Thank you. Having to end the meeting. Good night, all.
Good night, all. Yeah.